Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. We are starting off the episode by listening to barking dogs, our barking dogs.
Barking dogs.
How are you all doing? Okay, we are in, by the time you all hear this, it's going to be the end of August probably. And I hope that you all have transitioned, that your kids are in school, if you have kids, and that you're settling into the changing seasons. Unfortunately, we are here in Chicago and I'm already seeing leaves change, which I love the fall, but I'm not ready to see leaves change. So
we got good news and bad news.
yeah.
Good news, football.
Oh,
Bad news, snow. Lots of snow.
okay. Snow's not for several months. We have.
We'll see.
Yeah. Okay, so today we're talking about trauma, and we're doing a different take based on conversations that I've been having with people. So, what I often do with these episodes is I bring to you all the conversations I have in my life, whether it be with clients, whether it be with friends, just family members, about different things that I think to myself. Like, we've had some good conversations with my daughter last week, and my sister was here. And they're just the conversations that I think, oh, this is a great one to bring to the podcast, and one that I'm sure you all, I would love to have you all there sitting around our dining room table or, in the kitchen talking about the things that we just talk about. And one of them being trauma.
Yeah. I think that would be a TV show without a doubt.
My crazy family, of course.
Well, just the deep dives, right?
Yeah, we like to do deep dives as a family.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's too much. Sometimes we have to take a break, but everybody's psychologically minded for the most part, or will go there with deeper conversations. So I think it's the way we've raised them in a way to be real. That's important.
Yeah.
So I was talking with my daughter. She actually was getting coaching and looking for a life coach, and she'd been talking with someone and made a comment to me just in passing that it's really expensive and I don't know if I'm going to do it. And I said, and I said to my daughter, this person who did this discovery call with you, she spent a lot of time with my daughter, a lot of time, like more time than I spend. I think like an hour and a half. Yeah.
That was the discovery call.
That was a discovery call. Was like,
wow.
I think it was 2 calls. And you could tell that, I know coaching. I know the coach wanted to work with her, and they went over a lot of different issues. And then before that next call, that's what it was. My daughter said to me, I don't think I'm going to go with it. I said, well, why not? And she has been in therapy before. And so she's like, well, I don't need therapy, but I do want to work on this and this and this. I said, okay, how much is it and how hard is it for you to pay this? She's like, yeah, it's a stretch. I can do it, but it's a stretch. I have other bills, big bills that are coming up. She's going back to pay for some certification. And I said, you know what? You should do it. Do it, because you might get a lot out of this. You like her. You spent 90 minutes with her. Pay for it. And she did. And she's in coaching with her. But one of the things who she's really liking the experience too, which is she's really getting a lot out of it. So one of the things that she said to me in that conversation a few weeks ago was, she said, we started talking about trauma. And she goes, Ma, I've been in therapy. And she goes, I don't really have any big trauma in my life. And I don't need to, I don't need therapy. I'm not sure that I can pay for coaching right now. So that got me thinking about, and then I had another conversation with a friend about, that it's not always trauma. And that's really the title of today. I want to talk about how it isn't always trauma in our lives, and that you don't have to have trauma to go to therapy. And this is important because I think that we have really overused the word trauma, where it gets confusing to people about what's trauma.
Yeah.
And it is nuanced. So let me say that. And so when you listen to this episode today, think about yourself and where this shows up for you in your life, if it shows up at all. So, we everything is traumatizing to us. That's trauma. And I even say it, that was traumatizing. I used it this weekend when I was talking about actually giving birth to that child who's now 27 years old. 27 years ago, I did have a traumatic birth experience with her. And I was telling, we had family in town. I was telling everybody at the table what I went through, being in labor with her. And I said, gosh, that was traumatizing. And I knew that I was going to be having this conversation with you on the podcast about what is trauma. And I would say, now you've heard me in the podcast before talk about big T trauma, like a clinical diagnosis trauma, and small T trauma, and that many, many, many of us have had small T traumas in our lives, not the big T's, not the clinical diagnosis. And I would venture to say that that was a bit of a small T trauma for me. I mean, and the way that I think about that time was that I couldn't shake that for a while after she was born. It stayed with me, but it didn't stay with me for months. It stayed with me for a couple of weeks. And my parents were visiting, and I was really upset. My parents were upset about what had happened. And my father was at that time, he was a surgeon, and he was doesn't matter. I think he just retired, but so he knows how the hospital system works. It was a hospital that I worked at. I worked in that neonatal intensive care unit, and I knew those nurses in labor and delivery, but I didn't know the night staff, which is when she was born at midnight. I didn't know the 3 to 11 people, or the 7 p.m. to the 12-hour shift people. I didn't know those nurses, and they didn't know me. In a way, it doesn't really matter. They were slammed, and they had a real big T trauma up in the OR, an OB case up in the OR, and my doctor couldn't be there for me. Anyways, all that to say, it stayed with me. And I remember my dad saying, "You need to write a letter to the hospital. You need to write a letter and let them know what a terrible experience you had." And I didn't write the letter, and that probably would have helped me come to some resolve, just because I had 2 kids. I had a newborn, a 2-year-old at that time. It probably would have helped me with some resolve. But for me, it just was time. And it wasn't a very long time. It was probably a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. I would remember it, but it didn't bring back bad memories or anything of this healthy baby. So that is a small T, kind of a small T trauma. But I talk about this because I think it's important for all of us to think about, when you talk about trauma and you hear people talking about trauma, I think we often go, well, have I had trauma in my life? Have I had any traumatic experiences?
Well, I think that's a good place to start. What quantify trauma,
right?
So I think you should quantify what trauma is, and then I think a question I would follow that up with is it possible that your definition of trauma and mine and the listeners might be 3 different definitions?
Right. So there are life-changing events, and there's trauma, and those are 2 different things. Okay. So that's a great place to start. So you've got life-changing events, you've got trauma. A life-changing event could be a terrible breakup with a lover, boyfriend, girlfriend. It could be a divorce. It could be a job loss, getting fired, interpersonal conflicts with people in your life. Those can be life-changing events, but they're not always traumatic events. So think about that yourself as a listener. If you're watching us on YouTube, think about that for yourself. Or you may say, no, that divorce, that was a trauma.
That was trauma to me.
That was trauma. To me, that was trauma.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not always that. So when I said that about my daughter being born, that was a small T trauma for me, because it really shook me what happened. But I have had a lot of terrible things happen in my life that I don't think, now that I really started to do a deep dive on this, they were life-changing events. Most of us listening and watching have had life-changing events. Doesn't mean we're always traumatized by it or that stays with us. So
that's the big difference, is what you're saying. Yeah. Okay.
That stays with us.
It's lingering,
right?
Potentially for a long time,
right?
And
I think we can't get through this episode without talking about, and I'm not going to go in, we could do a whole episode in this, but I do want to mention that whether you've had a life-changing event or you've had trauma in your life, there's something called post-traumatic growth. And if you have had trauma and if you've worked on it, usually it's in psychotherapy, you can come out of that, and that's post-traumatic growth, where you come out the other side kind of bigger and better and stronger and more evolved and happier and more peaceful and contented than you were before. That's post-traumatic growth. Okay. So I wanted to show you, for those of you who are watching, I got out my big Bible, my DSM-5, which is what we all use for diagnosing. So this is in the clinical world of counseling and psychotherapy. This is not coaching at all. So this is what we use. This is how I have to know this, and this is how we're able to give you codes, the CPT codes, the ICD-9-10 codes for us as therapists. It's the CPT codes. It's how you get reimbursed for your insurance. Okay, so we have to give you a diagnosis.
So the diagnosis qualifies you to be able to use,
an Axis 1 diagnosis qualifies you for insurance reimbursement.
Yeah.
They're Axis 2, Axis 3, Axis 4, Axis 5. They are not reimbursable. Axis 2 are the cluster Bs, we call them. I could do no, I don't want to get too didactic here. Cluster Bs are personality disorders, borderline personality, narcissistic personality, avoidant, antisocial. Those are not, to this day, I don't believe they are not reimbursed by insurance. You have to have an Axis 1.
So, isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
if you think about it?
It's terrible. Yeah, I don't even think couples therapy is covered, and couples therapy should be covered.
Yeah.
I know it's terrible. And so what happens in couples therapy, this is my beef with you guys. If you've listened to me for a while, you know this is my beef with the whole therapy and insurance world, because people should be able to go and have couples therapy and have it covered. But what happens is somebody has to take the diagnosis. I know you and I have been in couples therapy. One of us had to take the diagnosis. And I would tell clients all the time, and they just knew it. They're like, that's fine, I'll take it. And I would give them the most benign, which is an adjustment disorder, which is a traumatic disorder, which falls under the trauma and stress related disorders. It's the most benign. We used to give those all the time, and I hope I'm not getting in trouble saying this on a podcast, but we all do it. And let's talk honestly about it. We all do it.
Yeah.
And they don't. And I think to myself, and that's why I went into coaching. One of the reasons I'm like, I got to stop doing this, because to me, it felt unethical. Like, you don't have a major depressive disorder. You don't have an adjustment disorder. You don't have it. You don't meet criteria for.
You've got some issues.
But you don't, like we all do.
Right.
But you don't meet criteria for a disorder in the DSM-5, the statistical manual of psychiatric illnesses.
Yeah.
You don't.
And then the bad part of that is so your insurance doesn't cover it, right? So you probably tap the brakes on am I going to go follow up with this? Am I going to do this? Am I going there? Right. And then you don't. And what happens? Then all of a sudden you get air quotes worse, or maybe it changes.
And you keep putting it off because you can't afford it.
But then all of a sudden, then it's then you do get the diagnosis and you're like, oh shoot, I wish I could have started working on that 4 years ago. Right.
Well, yeah.
That stinks.
You see that too.
Yeah.
Most of the people I saw did not meet criteria for a diagnosis.
It's important to me that the supplements I take are of the highest quality. And that's why for 5 years, I've been drinking AG1. Unlike many supplement brands, AG1 conducts relentless testing to set the standard for purity and potency. I know I can trust what's in every scoop of AG1 because it's tested for 950 contaminants and banned substances, while the industry standard typically only tests for 10. Taking care of my health shouldn't be complicated, and AG1 simplifies this by covering my nutritional basis and setting myself up for success in just 60 seconds. AG1's ingredients are heavily researched for efficacy and quality, and I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. So if you want to replace your multivitamin and more, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/Anna. That's drinkag1.com/Anna. Check it out. You will not regret it.
I wanted to start with the diagnostics of trauma. So almost everybody has heard about post-traumatic stress disorder. That was coined in the 70s. It came out of the Vietnam veterans, seeing all the vets coming out of Vietnam, the flashbacks, the depression, the combative moods, the nightmares. And they saw so many that when they put out what at that time it may have been the DSM-1 or DSM-3, they created that diagnosis because of all the people they were seeing coming, these combat veterans who are dealing with this, which they called in World War I. I think it was called before it was diagnosed. Oh my gosh, it's escaping me. Shell shock. Shell shock in World War I. The veterans came out of that war, and maybe World War II was shell shock. And then it wasn't until Vietnam that they coined the phrase post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's an Axis 1 diagnosis. I used to see it and I treat it because I treat trauma. I'm trained in trauma. So I would see that. I want to just go through these. So and I'm not going to bore all of you because I don't want to overwhelm you and give you too much information. You don't need to really know all this information, but I just want to underscore, an Axis 1 diagnosis that we as therapists and your therapist, if you have trauma, is looking at all this. This is what we do. So, and what I would do is I would go through some of these with my clients. I'd get the book out while they're in the office with me or if it's on Zoom, and I read them the clinical criteria. They're the client, they're the patient. Let's do this together into their life. They know themselves best. Let them think about, oh, yes, I have that. Yes, I have that. Okay, no, I don't have that. Yes, I have that. And I love doing it that way. And I think that, clients really felt that they were participating in if there's a diagnosis.
It's like an interactive diagnosis.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's interesting.
Right. Another one that was kind of a precursor to post-traumatic stress disorder was acute stress disorder. So, I mean, these are diagnoses. So that was, I think it had to be 3 days after a traumatic event. And then if it didn't subside, then you went into a post-traumatic stress disorder. So all this to say, there are diagnoses in here, this book that we use to give you an Access One that gets you the treatment that you need, and you need to see a trauma specialist, and you start to do the work on healing. And the treatments for trauma, most people have heard of EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I had somebody on the podcast. Now, if you want to go back to the podcast, I think it's must have been in 20 or 21, an EMDR specialist on. I've had a couple people on. Jeremy Fox talked about it as well, also is a trauma treatment specialist in Atlanta. So they talked about on this podcast about what EMDR is, how it works, and how it treats trauma. There's brain spotting, there's prolonged exposure, there's different types of treatment for trauma. And if you really have a Access One diagnosis, I recommend you specifically get treated for trauma. But most people are coming with small T trauma, or they're coming with life-changing events where it's like, it's not really trauma, but it has affected me and it's bothering me.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what I think I wanted to differentiate between the two, because it's such an overused term today. Because what it does is it kind of waters down when people really do have trauma.
Right.
And
so the second question I asked you, we can all look at a potential traumatic experience differently. Correct. Like you might define it as a traumatic experience, and I might look at it and I might be like, that's really bad.
Oh, I think you and I have had that.
But I'm not traumatized by it like you might be. Yeah.
It could be our wiring.
Yeah.
It could just be our constitution, our wiring. You're a good example of somebody who, I don't want to speak for you, but we've talked about this before with each other. I mean, I don't think you have any trauma in your life. You're one of the few blessed people. I mean, you don't talk about traumatic events or trauma at all in your life.
Yeah. I mean, not really. Yeah. I guess now that I think about it out loud,
you've had life-changing.
Oh, life-changing experiences. 1,000%. Yeah.
Getting through life.
No, all the time, right? Something will redirect your path.
Your divorce.
Yeah.
It's a horrible experience for you.
Yeah. And something's worse than others, but they're still redirecting your path through life.
Yeah.
But traumatic experiences, I mean, not that much that I can think of, right? Yeah. I mean, I think if I did, I'd be like, oh yeah, there was this or that right off the top of my head.
And you and I have been together in situations, or you have been around or witnessed me with, I'd say, small T trauma, and you've seen me struggle with small T trauma in my life.
Yeah.
And processing. And, you have been there, you witnessed it, but it didn't maybe happen to you. So you're not traumatized.
Right.
But when you say you see me and you're like, looking, now that we're having this conversation, it probably, I think you would say, I'm putting words in your mouth, that, that's small T trauma for you. Cause you know how I get.
Yeah.
I get pretty shut down.
You get shut down, and then you have the need to work and talk through it, right? You need to externally process that, and whoever is your person at the time is the person that me, but I and that's fine,
you,
right? But like I'm there to like listen and maybe slightly participate, but not actively, because I know that's not.
Because I just need to process.
That's not my function in that conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing. And so do you remember that woman that was that was going down in that triathlon that I went out and pulled her out of the water.
Oh, yeah.
So that's one thing I can look back on. And in the moment, like, I think there was just so much in the actual moment that I wasn't traumatized.
Tell the story.
Well, just real fast, because I'm sure.
That's a good story. Yeah. I forgot about that. That was years ago.
So we're standing at the start line.
Hold on. That was traumatizing for you?
Well, I think later it was, because it made me, there were times where that would come into my head. Right.
I never heard you say this.
Yeah. And I think when I'm with new swimmers now in the water, there's a moment of like, let's make sure we got everything buttoned up, because I don't want to have to pull somebody out.
You're the triathlon coach,
now,
the swim coach,
and I'm actually the one that is responsible 100%. Yeah. So
tell the story.
So real quick, so we're standing at the start line of a triathlon. I don't think you were racing that day.
No, I wasn't. It was pouring down rain. I had the boys with me.
Yeah, and I had a wetsuit on. I was waiting for my wave to go off.
We were standing with you on the beach.
Yeah, we're just waiting, and it's wave after wave of people. Then the waves are probably 50 to 75 people per wave that would go. So the
waves are the groups that they send you off to the start of a triathlon. Yeah. So you're in a air quote wave.
Yeah.
And it's usually your age group. So you could be in a air quote wave with 5 people, and it's goes by sex. So I could be with 5 women. I could be with 105 women.
Yeah.
Depending on the size of the race. So go ahead.
So the wave in front of us went. Everybody started to swim, and there was one lady that was noticeably behind the group, and all of a sudden she started crying for help and went under.
You were watching from the beach.
I was watching from the beach, and I was the next wave to go. So I was just standing at the start line, just waiting to go, waiting to be called to go. And this lady went down. She bobbed up. She went down. She bobbed up.
You were watching this.
I'm watching the whole thing, and I'm like, is anybody gonna like help this lady? And like, there were like kayaks, within 25 to 50 yards of this person. I think there might have been a boat there, whatever.
There was a kayak right by her.
Yeah. Nobody moved. This lady was obviously struggling. She could not keep herself.
She was starting to drown,
and she was going down.
She was drowning.
Yeah. So I was standing at the fence. I jumped over the fence and into the water, and
you took off. You're like, you just were gone.
I'll be right back. And so I jumped in, swam as fast as I could out to this woman, and I got right up to her. And thank goodness I had been trained as a lifeguard back in the day. So I had
when you were in high school.
Yeah, but the knowledge of what to do in a situation like that was tucked right inside my brain. So because I got a little too close, she grabbed me and we both went under.
Yeah.
So we both went down.
She's panicking.
Yeah. I let go of her and I spun her around underneath the water, and that caused her to let go of me because that freaked her out. And she's just trying to get back to the top. So when she and I both came up, I'm now behind her, which was a great thing. Right. So then I was able to hug her, and I just started talking to her, and I got her to calm down. At that point, a kayak came over and we got her up onto to be able to hold on to it. Yeah. But it was a whole to do. And we talked and talked and talked to her. Finally got her to the beach, and she was like, I think her people were coming, or maybe there were some race people that were coming over to deal with it. Nobody seemed to be.
I was there with the boys. I was watching the entire thing. First of all, 1 minute you're talking to us, the next second you're gone, running into the water, didn't know what was going on. And then I saw the woman flailing. I watched the teenager in the kayak, the lifeguard, he didn't know what to do. He just didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And thank God you were there. That woman, scary. And you brought her out, and she was very fit. She was muscle.
She was a big person.
She was muscular, cut.
Yeah,
she had no body
fat. Yeah.
She wasn't big.
Yeah.
She was just she looked like a bodybuilder. She had no body fat.
Yeah.
And this was like her first or second triathlon. She was trying something new.
Yeah.
And she had a fear of the water, which she didn't realize. She got in there, she panicked, and she's so heavy with muscle, she started to sink. And I watched her come out, and she just stood there like stunned, shocked, I think, of what had happened. And you came out of the water first before her. I know she was taking her time getting out.
No, I brought her out because then I said to her, I said, all right. I said, are you good? Because then the people started to get on. She's like, yeah. Go ahead. She goes, can you stay here though with me? Because we made this connection. I'm like, you know what? I said,
you have to go because then your weight went.
She thought I was a worker. She thought I was one of the race crew people. And I said, no, I'm actually racing, and that's my wave. They just left. I got to go. And then I had to catch up with everybody.
Tim just took off and ran back in the water, went to to race.
To swim. Yeah.
What just happened?
So anyway, all that to say, that's in my head. And there are moments where that does come, that experience comes and surfaces itself, for a moment, not often and not.
So that was a life-changing event for you because you're in Lake Michigan now every week with all of your athletes who are afraid of the water.
Yeah.
Teaching them how to open water swim.
Yeah. So I see it differently now.
But was that, okay, so I'll ask, was that a trauma? Was it a small T trauma? Was it a big T trauma? Was it a life-changing event?
Well, it certainly was life-changing because the way I coach is different now because of that. Was it a trauma? I would say, it would be definitely a small T trauma for me. I think if let's say it was you that I pulled out or one of our kids that I pulled out, different story. Right? Different conversation. Yeah. So I think that's why it's a small T for me.
Yeah.
So anyways, good example.
I didn't know that you were traumatized by that. You've never spoken of it. And that was more than 10 years ago. And here we are today. You're bringing it up in this. I didn't know
random.
That. Interesting.
Yeah. So,
well, there you go. And I think that, so it's not always trauma. And I think that, this conversation is only for you to think about, how it feels inside of you. Are you experiencing trauma? What are the symptoms of a big T trauma? What is it like to have small T trauma? I think that, when we use the word trauma, what we can do is dilute the meaning and its impact on people. So if everybody says, "Oh, I'm traumatized. I was traumatizing. You yelled at me. I'm traumatized." Like, okay. I don't want to judge other people. That's not my business. I think it's just important to think about, maybe using another term. I'm really mad. I'm really upset. That really affected me. I thought about that for days after you just yelled at me in front of everybody. Is that trauma? For some people, they might say, yes, Anna, it was.
They might.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
They may say, yeah, it is because that's something that I went through as a kid. And and that happened to me a lot and it re-traumatized me. Okay. And other people would say, no, I don't really, it's not really trauma. It didn't really affect me. I'm just really mad at that person, and I'm pissed off and I got to go talk to them. Like, but is it life-changing? I don't even know if it's life-changing, but all this to say that this whole episode is about, it's not always trauma.
True.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And to think about, just be mindful of the word you're using, the words you're using when you talk about your life experience. I think that that's important, that, there's times it's legit and it's real and nobody can tell you anything different. And there's, I think that when we don't say everything is always a trauma, it really can help all of us as a community and as a collective work on resilience. That we can come back from hard things and that there is resilience in all of us. We all go through hard things in our lives. Hard things doesn't always mean traumatic things. And that when we start to speak about resilience and coming back, that helps the collective of all of us here getting through this time on earth right now.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think the other side of the coin also is important. So if you observe or you see somebody that's going through a traumatic experience and you don't maybe think that it should be or is, to show that person some grace, right? Because for you it might be like, oh, whatever, but don't let that person know that that's your take on it, right? Like empathize a little bit with them,
right? Show
them some compassion, help them, give them a shoulder to cry on or whatever it might be,
Access one, post-traumatic stress disorder, the traumatic and stress disorders that are at DSM-5. I would know when I was seeing it, that could be something about, having veterans coming back from Iraq, Afghanistan. I only saw one or two of them. I mean, that's a specialty. That was really rough. Childhood physical abuse, sexual abuse, massive chaos in a family, the verbal abuse, the emotional abuse, witnessing a severe car accident, being in a car accident, natural disasters throughout the world, being in a natural disaster, violent assault, any kind of assault. These are all traumatic Axis 1 diagnoses. I knew somebody had PTSD in my office, or a stress response that was going to possibly lead into a PTSD when I was affected. And that's why I had to really protect myself, because I worked in child abuse. And there's something called secondary trauma and tertiary trauma, where secondary is you hear the story. So I would hear people's stories over and over and over again, session after session after session. And now I'm getting traumatized by it. So I would know by the way I felt in my body, where I felt it in my stomach and clenching. And if I couldn't stop thinking about something a client had told me, I knew that was PTSD. I knew they had major, massive trauma, and they were there for trauma treatment. So I had to really, you have to do an excellent job as a clinician at protecting yourself and having safeguards around yourself when you're treating trauma. You need to be there for your client, fully show up there for your client. And as a human being, you can't unhear the things you hear. You must take care of that side of you. And I would even say you don't have a full caseload of people with, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Those type of
You can't.
clients.
You just can't. You're going to burn out. And that's what happened to me. I did years and years of child abuse, and I burnt out because I could not see one more abused child. I was out and never went back.
Right.
So all that to say, I think that.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you've obviously talked to more people that fall into this category than probably anybody else, certainly that I know, but probably the listeners too. So is it, I'm just thinking, is it the incident that's traumatic more so than what could have been, like a near miss? That's the traumatic part. Like the person's like, ooh, if I had just been 2 inches this way, or if that car had done just this instead of that, I could be dead right now, or I could be whatever.
It could be both.
Right?
Yeah, it could be both.
There's no, it's not one over the other. It's a mix. You're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think it's the entire experience. I mean, yeah, I mean, who is to say how it affects each of us so differently? You know what I mean? Being, the person who was assaulted or being next to the person who got assaulted. I mean, you could absolutely have PTSD or a acute stress response by witnessing it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's what I was just saying. I mean, I heard stories where there were times I would like slide down the wall of my office after I shut the door and they left. I a couple times I just like stood there stunned. I could not believe what I heard. And I had another client in 10 minutes and I was like, I gotta gather myself together. I have to regroup. I gotta shake that off because I gotta now be fully available, emotionally available, and give my full emotion and mental attention to the next person. And I am, whoa, that was heavy. And there were times I seriously like just sat down on the ground and leaned up against a wall in my office and was like, what just that human being has gone through.
Yeah.
That's how you just know. And I think any therapist who's ever treated trauma, anyone who's listening, who's in my field knows, like we're all nodding. Yep. We know. But I think most of life is small T traumas and or life-changing events.
Yeah.
Because you're not, like I said in the beginning, you're not getting through this life without having life-changing events.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking of like the incident, the story that I shared tonight. So for me, I don't know that it was as much the incident because I kind of went through the motions and it kind of played out as it did. But the thought of what could have happened
scares you.
Is scary.
Yeah.
And that's a traumatic part. So that's why I was asking that question, like, which is it? Because it could be one, the other could be both, right? It could be a combination of two of them. I guess in every situation is probably a little different.
Yeah. I mean, you never really spoke about that after. I mean, I would speak about it because I would say to people, not all heroes wear capes.
It's true. I didn't have a cape on that day.
I thought you were such a hero. And I bragged about it because I was so proud of you because I couldn't believe you did that. You just ran in that water after that woman and nobody was paying attention. No one was watching. There was so much frenetic, nervous, chaotic energy with the start of a triathlon. And in the middle of all of us was someone drowning. Yeah. And you just, for some reason, you saw her and you took off to save her.
Yeah.
And I've talked about that with people over the years about what a hero you were, but you don't speak of it as much yourself, and you don't speak of it in a way where it affected you in an emotional or negative way.
Yeah.
Until right now.
Yeah. I don't know why it came to my head tonight, but.
So, if any of this is resonating for you, and you do have something that has happened in your life and you haven't dealt with it, and you're finding it's affecting you, maybe your mood, irritability, lack of sleep, maybe there's a sadness or a depression there, that depression can often be feeling stuff on the inside. Please seek help for it. See a psychotherapist, see, LCSW, LCPC, just a licensed mental health therapist, a PhD, and get help with the trauma that you're carrying around. Okay. And you don't have to have trauma to go to therapy. So if you have something that's bothering you, something that was said to you that you can't get past, an incident that you witnessed, I don't know for you if that's trauma or not, but go talk to someone, because there's every reason for you to go explore that and figure that out. It doesn't, in a way, it doesn't matter if it's big T trauma or just a life-changing event. In a way, it doesn't matter. I wanted to do this episode because of my daughter and I having this conversation, circling back to the big beginning of this episode, about her saying to me, well, I don't have trauma. I don't have trauma in my life. And I said, well, yeah, but okay, well, not everybody has trauma. It still is a reason to, go to therapy. And now life coaches they're not really supposed to treat trauma because they're not trained in it. My coaching clients may have past trauma, but many of them have they've dealt with it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about their trauma. If I see it's coming up, I'm going to refer them to a therapist. Coaching, I don't think coaching really ought to be in the trauma space. I have a strong opinion about that. But sometimes with your coach, you may find that there's something that's percolating to the surface for you that you haven't really dealt with. And there you go. Then, go see a therapist around that.
Right. Makes sense.
Okay. So, just wanted to bring out this conversation because I've had 2 of these conversations about, you don't have to have trauma to go to therapy. If you want to talk about anything that's going on in your life, go to therapy or get a life coach. I think everybody at this point in our lives in 2024 ought to be talking to somebody about their life. If you want to grow, if you want to gain insight, if you want to gain in knowledge, if you want to evolve, if you want to show up a better version of yourself in your future, go to therapy and then get coaching. Do it. You will not regret it. You're not going to regret it. And if you are regretting it, you don't have the right person.
Yeah. It's personal development, right?
Personal development.
You're developing a better version of you.
Yeah. Okay. So I have some slots open. So reach out to me if you're interested in coaching. If you're in Illinois and you want therapy, you can reach out to me as well. hello@annamarcolin.com. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. We so appreciate it. 5 stars would be wonderful. And until next time, mad love, everyone.